talking about stats a little bit, and I think this is a very interesting for a lot of viewers who like to see diversity in their meta. Without, of course, talking about your playbook, but more, and not necessarily about that of the opponents you've scrimmed against as well. Are there like general metas? Is there just like currently in scrims, is there like one meta comp, or do we have more diversity?
Right now, I think there are two big archetypes. There are two big archetypes that everyone is running. There's diversity in those as well, but the two big archetypes, you can just probably, or we call them poke and rush, where the rush comp is mainly, normally it's like Reaper, May, Orisa, Wine, Lucio, and like Moira or Baptiste or something. And poke comp is again May with Hanzo this time, and then maybe you have a different flex support. You still have Orisa because Orisa just seems really good right now, and you don't have a Lucio, but those are the big archetypes, so it doesn't seem like a big difference from the heroes that are in them, but the way you play those two comms is very different because of the win conditions they create. But with one, you really want to be close up, and with the other one, you want to kite and like put as much distance between you and the others as possible, have like great positions. So in that sense, we kind of are out of goats because goats has been replaced by two things now. We still have like goats, which we call wash now, and we have a poke comp that is map dependent better than the goats comp, because just of how the map layout works, it's sometimes too hard, and with the Lucio speed boost being nerfed and stuff, it's too hard to get close. So the poke comps actually win out over the wash comps. There are teams trying like hybrid comps. I bet there's Chengdu doing all kinds of stuff, but I don't know because we don't scrim Asian teams. I think there's still a lot of experimenting actually. Yes. There's teams playing Junkrat and Widow, and I bet there's room for a double sniper on like some maps.
Yes.
So it is diverse. It is more diverse, I think, than in the past. But you still have like two big archetypes of comms that people are sticking to right now.
Now, is that general across like a number of maps? Obviously, I'm sure like some archetypes are better on some maps, but are you seeing teams run an archetype that you kind of value as less than on maps that, wouldn't suit it? Is it really two general schools of thought?
So it is very team dependent as well, because it depends on team philosophy and what you think your team is good at. For example, Shock has always been known for being really good at rushing, so I think they are sticking to it. I know that NYXL last season has been very good at playing slowly. Yeah, passive, if you will. And so you would think that they are probably more of like a team that would prefer pole comps. We have our own preferences, which I won't talk about. But
NYXL...
Yeah,
that's how they're going to play. I get it.
Here's their playbook.
I'm just saying
all of those in the Scrimbucks Stock Exchange, of course, probably coming next week.
I obviously don't know if they are still doing it,
sure.
But just from past experience, I think that NYXL has always been a team that's been playing slower.
Totally.
San Francisco always has been a team that's been playing faster, and if they stick to that, then you can kind of imagine what their comms would look like, or the preferences would look like. And the same sense, you can look at every other team and be like, oh, maybe this player is an insane Widow, so maybe this team will play more Widowmaker. So I think it's not like every team has to do those two archetypes. It's more up to teams right now. It's more flexible and dependent on what players you actually have and what you think they're good at. Which is a nice thing to do because you add diversity and it's probably more exciting for viewers. and also more exciting to analyze because you have to analyze your opponents and like predict what's going to happen and stuff. Which has always been like a fun thing about video games because there are different ways to play it. It's not like football where you always have 11 people and always a ball, and you can change like what each person is supposed to do, and I'm talking about soccer, the actual football, by the way.
Whoa, sir.
But in Overwatch, you have different characters, so it is fun right now just looking at different teams and what they want to do.
So to speak on maybe something a little off the walls, a little outside of those two schools of thought, we are seeing not only in China, I'm going to preface that first. We are seeing it, we saw a little bit of it in, the Winter Classic
China.
with the Mayhems tournament. Do you think there's room for a dive-ish composition? Maybe not necessarily Winston and Diva, but maybe Wrecking Ball and other compositions. Are you seeing that? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's very map dependent. I think it's probably not something you want to do all the time because of just how strong those Russian Pokems are. And if you think about it, the Rush comp in particular seems like a natural counter to the dive comp because
totally.
Who wants to dive into a Reinhardt, Risa, Reaper, and May, who all will survive whatever you do, especially if there's a Moira as well, and then the only target is like Lucio. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that dive is not strong enough to dive into stuff like that, but I can see, again, there's like different experiments and different comps being played. It's not just those two archetypes, and I can see dive having a place. I can see dive being good at times, but I think it's very team dependent, and I think it's very map dependent as well. So only if like the team is supposed to be really good at dive, and then the map also allows dive, then I can see dive happening. But it's not something that I would see happening a lot, and I didn't see those tournaments. I don't know how much they played those compositions, but just because of how strong the Rush comp is naturally going to be against dive, I don't see it being like the third archetype, so to say.
That's fair. Yeah, one of the big reasons why I bring that up is because Shanghai had just signed Fearless, and he's coming from a team that is like easily the best team going into contenders in China, and they're playing a good amount. Like I'd say 35% of the time they're playing like Winston Diva. They play it all Eichenwald for whatever reason, but we're also not seeing a ton of the the Rush comp as we'll call it. We're seeing a lot more poke.
I can see it if you have like a really good Sombra, because Sombra is always good.
Sure.
So maybe if you have like a really good Sombra and people are preferring to play poke, then Rush could be really good. But I don't know. I haven't been following China, but I guess, yeah, maybe it does really well at times.
So it's kind of like a not a natural counter, but you'd much more favor that into poke than Rush.
I think Rush is like a natural counter, because I don't think dive is a natural counter to poke. I wouldn't say that either, but. So it's not like a triangle thing.
It's not rock paper.
Right. Yeah. But I guess I could see it. I didn't watch China, so
that's fair. That's fair.
Who does, by the way?
Yeah, not very many people. That's why we have Chengdu at 16th, right, guys? Anybody in the chat? 16th? Chengdu?
I mean, listen. You don't have to watch 16, China baby. To know that Chengdu at 16 is way too low.
See, maybe Chengdu is like diving all the time. Maybe it's really good, because that's the fun about Chengdu and China. It's like they are doing all the crazy shit, and maybe they figured out that diving with like Doom, Sombra, and Diva Wrecking Ball or something is like the best thing you can do. I have no idea, but
we'll find out.
We'll see. It's it's not just because teams like to look at like San Francisco Shock and Vancouver Titans and be like, oh, they're playing this, we should play this too because they beat us. That's not something you can do, because right now at least, because it's more flexible and it's more up to your players. So if you're the Atlanta Reign, you might not want to do what San Francisco is doing all the time, because your players are different and your playstyle is different in turn. So I guess maybe Chengdu figures something out, right?
That's another, like, okay, we frequently ask or talk about the possibility of having two different metas in the different regions because of travel restrictions. But I also think that there's this distinct possibility that both, mostly Chengdu, but also to a lesser degree Shanghai, just taught teams that playing like perpendicular to the meta and not straight on can have massive advantages. And I hope that also, especially teams that cannot expect to reliably outperform even mid-tier teams on the established meta comp, take that lesson and just like reinvent a new way to play for themselves, looking at the roster that they had. I think almost every roster, like even Valiant, they did play meta comps for the most part. Admittedly, they adapted to Sombra also fairly quickly, but one of the important parts for their season was, let's look at what we have, what our system can support, and then we customize towards that. Now, they did it in roster building, right? They looked at their coaching staff, they looked at the players, what is the path of least resistance? Okay, we do that. For me, it almost felt like the path of least resistance was like mentally blocked for a lot of these lower tier teams last year, where it's like goats, right? Like it, maybe you have like an 0.3% percent chance that you can like hilariously through some ways like find something out about goats, or like everyone improves massively and suddenly you're on par with like maybe not Shock, but the tier below that. Very unlikely. It's much more likely that you start beating like the mid-tier teams, but just playing some wacky stuff. And I wonder if Chengdu and Shanghai taught that to those teams this season, despite on top of the segregation of regions or divisions rather, contributing to meta diversity. Because theoretically, you would think, okay, there's a lot of volatility in the system. Let's all rally around this meta flag. I think because of how season 2 went, this now, just from a psychological point of view, became less likely.
I'm very much looking forward to how it all works out with us not being able to scrim Asia, for example. Because I remember at the start of last season, I don't know if I said it on the podcast or whatever, but I think I said something like, I expect teams like Houston, maybe I said, to run like a lot of quad DPS because it plays into their play style and their players would be good at it, which they didn't do, and then they performed badly, by the way. But that's still something I'm convinced of, that you should play to your strength, and I was glad that Chengdu did that last season, because I'm very much in that church, if you want to say that, of believing that you should not stick to what everyone is doing, but you should look for what you are supposed to do and where you can shine. And I think teams didn't do that last season. Maybe Houston or some of them.
I think teams in general have had a weird apathy towards that whole idea. I think Overwatch, weirdly enough, is very, and I think most esports have this, but I think it's more prominent here, is this weird like gentleman's handshake that like, oh, this is what is good. We'll only play this. We'll only practice against this, which again, like that's a whole nother train of thought that people are just removing from, is you don't want to practice because you've basically handshook with the entire league that we're only going to play goats, and that's what we want to practice against because that's majority of the field. Then you have Chengdu playing their own weird kind of recipe, which I like to use as a metaphor because your team is like a cookbook, right? Instead of trying to make a stew with the ingredients to make cake, just make a stew, right? Like just make what you have. Just use the ingredients to the best of their ability.
To be fair though, I think it's very human to do that, because if you look like something like basketball, it's like everyone played the same way, and then like 20 years ago they figured out, hey, wait, this is bad, maybe we should play for more 3-pointers, whatever it was. So I think it's very human if you're like in, let's say, in like your own bubble, that everyone conforms to doing the same thing. And that's what's so exciting about this season, because East Coast is not going to scrim a lot of China, a lot of Korea. So they are in their region, we are in our region. We don't know what's happening there, and they don't know what's happening here. That means we conform to our thing, and they conform maybe to something completely different. And maybe they are both equal, or maybe one of them is actually so much better than the other. So I hope there's a lot of diversity coming from the Asian teams. But we will only figure out once the season actually starts.
I mean, to your point there, like we could briefly look at some of the styles last year. Like a lot of teams did obviously have styles of play, but like the ones that really stuck out the most, like you talked about Shock being, very aggressive. We talk about Titans being very aggressive. We talk about NYXL being, a little bit more defensive. I like the idea of like the whole recipe metaphor is to kind of play into that, right? We want to have a style. You want to have your identity, and it needs to be strong. It doesn't need to be like a weird pick. It doesn't need to be a weird composition. It just needs to be the way you want to play the game. And if you're always chasing the best team, you're never going to be obviously the best. And it's not about just innovating, because that's much easier said than it'll just go ahead and innovate forehead. That's very hard for humans to do, but it's about figuring out what your team does best. And it might not be the most optimal thing, but that's going to yield you, I guess, the most results, the better results.
I remember last season we played like some weird Torbjorn stuff on Volskaya once we had Mangachu, and we were winning with it like all the time, because no one knew how to play against it. And that's one of the advantages, because if you play something weird, then no one will practice against it. And it's like, I think on match day, it's like, what are we going to do against this?
I think two big like examples of that kind of in action are Houston into Seoul in season 1. I think a lot of the Seoul players, a lot of the Korean players in general came out and were like, I don't know how, we've never even practiced against Junkrat. Like, what is this? Like, and then to talk about Chengdu, and like, they just didn't get practice. They were off in their own weird bubble. Like nobody wanted to practice with them. So they were, it's such a missed opportunity. I think teams are missing out on, but enough on my soapbox.
It's also like, if we think of it, I think even from a theoretical point of view, never was it less in or more inopportune to do non-metas shit. Okay, let me like, oh my god, I put 7 negatives in one sentence. What is happening to this brain right now? So Goats made it so experimenting was very hard to do, because Goats was so strong inherently. Sure. Usually meta comps aren't this ridiculous in comparison to the other archetypes that have been found.
Yeah.
So if that already worked last season to an extent for some teams, and yes, there will always be caveats to that. Like,
of course,
teams, there's like top teams saying, okay, like let us scrim against Shanghai like 2 weeks more, and we figure that out and still keep playing Goats. Fine, you didn't do it in the stage finals. That's what matters. So. In that regard, I think the metas that we have now, and of course we have 3 weeks to go, and I might be eating my words at the end of the 3 weeks, and we find something as strong. But as it presents itself to us right now, it is far less rigid inherently. There's not like a meta core comp that seems to be so ridiculous so impenetratable or invulnerable as Goats is, even though to a degree we still see these characteristics in that rush comp as well. But it seems much more exploitable, especially once the maps come into play. Now, currently we're in a luxury period where every team has a lot of time to figure stuff out. I'm not as concerned about the first couple of weeks, and then maybe once a meta patch hits, I wonder if then variety would slow down because people just don't have enough time to figure it out. But then again, we got to remind ourselves that there are teams that just randomly have 4 weeks off. Yep. And they can go into their laboratory and they can literally reinvent how metacomps will happen just through that. Usually, like in seasons past, Contenders did that for us, where they had a rough idea. Now it could be like better coaching staffs coming in, more organized practice, with like just like a lot of time in those cases. I'm sure they will have a week off, or maybe if you have a 4-week break, probably 1 week off, and then they just like sit down and say, okay, this worked, this didn't. Maybe we get some academy team and we just grind it out until we have something that just beats the current meta archetype. And then we just come out rolling and it works somehow. And we have these, I think 4 teams have 4-week breaks, or 3, if I'm remembering correctly.
A couple big ones,
Eric may correct me in chat in a bit. And then there is a bunch of teams that have 3-week breaks. Yeah. A lot of them, actually. Just very few only have 2-week breaks. So individual teams will have time to rally at different parts in the season, and then of course we have meta changes and we have map changes. It just feels to me that unless the desire to feel security in the meta comp is too strong, if that's the case, okay, but everything else screams to me we will have a diverse season.
Yep, I would agree. I think we've been banging that drum for quite a while in the postseason. It's going to be more diverse. We're
diverse get more. Season. We get 2.
Yep.
2 metas.
Nice. Maybe in the middle this time.
Yeah, right.